Well, hey, let's get this mic on. Usually I'm yapping away already and the mic is off. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. I am here in southern Spain and I'm freezing my cojones off. Yes, I can say that because I am in Spain. Oh, it is cold. I tell you, it is cold. So, busy night tonight, or maybe not. It all depends. I'm a little bit nervous about this topic, I kid you not. One thing is to talk about nutrition, pH, when you have time to edit. And another thing is to talk about it when you're doing free flow. So if there's anything that I'm not covering tonight where you say, oh, that sounds like word salad to me, then please do me a favor and intervene. Using my channel name at Ninja Orchids, it'll highlight my name and I should be able to see it clearer and quicker if I'm concentrating on the multiple screens. Or alternatively, you can also highlight a comment by giving a super chat. Now, audio issues, all the, let's say, the veterans of live streams, it's good to have you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that you're here. Know that the crackling and everything else should be at a minimum. The moment it starts, intervene, do something, I don't know what, comment, highlight my name, all that fun stuff. And then I will have to mute, and then hopefully the stream will catch up. As per usual, we have a slight delay tonight, about 10-11 seconds. If I were to ask a question, we might have some dead air, so I've got some background music. If it's too loud, also let me know. And if it's interfering and it is annoying you, let me know and I will shut the thing off. Someone's had a bee in their bonnet. Okay, it's better than a rat because rats eat cables. Sarah M, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for being here. It's good to have you. Now, I have titled this as a pH discussion. However, we cannot ignore a pH discussion without looking at why we should pH. If we've never pH'd, then at least we can maybe glean some information as to why our orchids are doing strange things that they haven't done before, depending on how long you've had your orchid in your collection, of course, because if you get a new orchid in, hopefully she's super healthy, and there are no symptoms of deficiency, and you just go on with your business the way you treat all your orchids. And that could be no pH, using tap water, and everything is fine. So, in order to avoid a little bit of, as they say, word salad, I am going to read a little script that I have prepared just so that I stay on track, because the minute I look at my screen, I'm already like, yeah, bling, 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 and my head is going off firework style-y. So let's stay on track. Now, I'm gonna read a little bit, something I've written out just so that I stay on course. If you have never pH'd any nutrient solution, then you may be wondering what the fuss is all about. Your orchids are growing well, and this stream is not to confuse. It's not to say what is right or wrong. This stream is there to offer another opinion and why I believe pH is important, no matter the method of growing orchids. I have grown in several setups. If you want to call it al fresco in the landscape, if you want to call that a setup, I have done that. But I've also grown in organic media with clay pots. And now my orchids are mainly in self-watering and semi-hydro with inorganic media. While my orchids were growing as part of the landscape, I did nothing to fertilize them. I did nothing to pH the water. It was either rain or they just got hosed down. I had no clue about the quality of my water. I didn't even factor that in. So while they were in organic media and clay pots, for the most part, I did fertilize sporadically. I did not pH. I used tap water and rainwater straight out of the bucket in which it was collected. And I used a conventional fertilizer, not necessarily orchid-based. Now, the reason all of this is we're going back in the 90s. This whole internet thing wasn't a thing. And I just thought orchids, water, Oh, I'm in the Western world now. I can get fertilizer. Hey presto, that's the only premise as to why I started fertilizing. Anyway, so the mistakes of the conventional fertilizer were a learning curve until I came to the understanding that my leaves were not getting burnt at the tips after I had not fertilized for more than 6 months. I kid you not, when I say sporadically, I mean sporadically. Anyway, after, time goes by and 6 months or more of not fertilizing, I noticed that new growths were always clean. And that didn't happen when I then thought, ooh, I'm going to fertilize now, which brought me to the conclusion that I had been too heavy-handed when I used conventional fertilizer. Meanwhile, I'm still not pHing. So I reduced those levels when adding it to my orchids, and eventually I figured out there has to be a relationship with what I was doing when I was adding fertilizer as opposed to just water because, water the orchids, get out, get to work, and all that fun stuff. Anyway, now, with this third collection, everything is more targeted. Thanks to the internet, and thanks to inorganic media, which is void of nutrients. Reverse osmosis, the water that I have to use, not because, we are deluxe over here. No, I have to use reverse osmosis water. That is also void of nutrients. So the whole fertilizing spiel has taken on a completely different approach, and the intent is to be more targeted. Many orchid growers that grow in inorganic media say that they like the fact that they have more control when it comes to applying fertilizer because they can pH according to what they want the orchids to absorb. And I am one of those that likes that part of the setup, the control part. But ineffective pH will show up much quicker in form of deficiencies, so growing the way I do is a huge, wide open, clean window into the right and wrongs of pH. Right. Now, we can't do the pH thing without talking about toxicity, and I will get to that. So, taking into consideration that orchids do not need fertilizer to grow well, because they don't, they produce their own carbohydrates from photosynthesis, which is the most important factor for our orchids' growth. In confinement, however, which is how I like to describe what we're doing with orchids in pots, we grow them in confinement. We have to add fertilizer, seeing as we are not as perfect as Mother Nature, who balances everything out to perfection. So, while there is more control with pH when everything is inorganic and the water is close to 0 parts per million, there is also that beautiful, bright, crystal clear window that will expose mistakes. Mistakes can come from a learning curve until we understand the orchid we're dealing with, or environmental circumstances not allowing us to fertilize as necessary until conditions improve, or we get a new orchid, unbox her, and she clearly is in distress because the nursery where we bought her from wasn't doing their due diligence, just had the commodity waiting for it to sell. And even while an orchid is in rescue mode, it's lost its roots, there's no way of the orchid absorbing any nutrients over a considerable amount of time, etc., etc., etc. There are a plethora of reasons why we get deficiencies. Right, so, but if there is something not quite right with the pH of the water in the pot, and we do the same thing over and over and over again, assuming that we have a great root system, deficiencies will take at least 7 months to manifest themselves, enough for us to notice them. Correcting deficiencies can take even longer, especially if we are faced with seasonal influences when growing our orchids, or an orchid goes dormant and then we start again the next season. The slow metabolism of orchids allows for correcting some deficiencies, but it will take much longer to determine if what we diagnosed as a deficiency was in actual fact the case. I know you're wondering what all this has to do with pH. That's why I put that chart there. Anyway, however, not trying to correct it will certainly perpetuate the problem, eventually causing the orchid to weaken and cross that bridge and become a memory of once upon a time I had this orchid. So yeah, now, not all deficiencies are detrimental to the health of the orchid. Thankfully, many nutrients are mobile, and we will get into which ones a little bit later, but for the most part, if a deficiency can be diagnosed, then it is best to look at what is happening with the older structures of the orchid, because mobile nutrients will be moved from those to provide the growing point with everything it needs so that the orchid can do what it needs to do. Eventually bloom to get pollinated and so on and so forth. So watching the appearance and development or decline of the older structures of our orchids will give us a heads up that something is lacking. We can pretty much say 80% of the time, even though we're all gaga over new growths taking shape, at that point we need to look at other structures in the back just to double check if we're doing the right thing and there are no deficiencies forming, bearing in mind that it takes a long time to see them, 7 months. I'm going to probably repeat that quite a lot because not every new growth will, within 10 days, show a deficiency. Anywho, now, of course, not all nutrients are mobile, and then if there is a deficiency in any way, shape, or form, it will have serious repercussions for the continued existence of the orchids, and I will point out as we move along what to watch out for, which ones are mobile, and so on and so forth. Now, back to the subject. That is why pH is so important. Not just to, well, my opinion. Let me go back to that again. My opinion, because many people, including myself in the past, did nothing of the sorts and things were fine, and I'm using duck feet when I say fine. So pH, however, does ensure that we give our orchids a well-balanced diet, but it also ensures that the growing points will grow strong while in active growth, because we can always forfeit an older structure thinking, yeah, big deal, it's old, it's withering away. Never mind, the front is doing well. However, just keeping those older structures, because they are storage structures in the back, well maintained and strong, in the event that something goes really horribly wrong, they have something to work with, to draw from, which if we deplete them simply because, well, we've got storage structures, should something go horribly wrong, there is no more backup plan. They have been depleted while they might still be standing, but they may be looking a little bit weird, and every mobile nutrient has been taken out of them to be able to ensure that the orchid continues growing at its growing points. So when it comes to a real emergency, we don't have a backup plan. There is no plan B. And that is why, in my opinion, pH is important so that all the structures remain strong and we don't just focus on what is happening at the front. Right, that is the end of my script. Everything. Hello, Don Miguel, hola jefe. A fertilizer with chelated metals, iron through molybdenum, allows them to be absorbed at a higher pH than on the chart. Yes, and I'm going to get to that. You can see my green elements. I have not explained my chart just yet. I wanted to get into the groove of this stream. The whole setup of this chart has something to do with, well, maybe I should remove the caption and then we can see the chart. I mean, hello. All right. So I have not as such explained my chart, but my little box, I was trying to get rid of my little box early on in the studio, but I can't be removed from that corner there. But you can see, we might as well move into this. You can see how the green has depth. It is more saturated through the middle, and then it goes higher, or let's say it is stronger off to the right, going into the 8 pH as opposed to the left where it is a little bit weaker. Now, I want to make sure, yes, oh, you asked Michael, but yes, I've used K-Lite. Anyway, I wanted to make sure that this chart covers 80% of the orchids that most people have in their collection. We can also go into some specifics, just as a side note, that some orchids can go, with a pH way, way lower simply because that's what they like, especially some of the slipper orchids. But if I'm interpreting your comment correctly, Michael, what you see down here is just a margin where I shall be getting to if we get to that point, if this doesn't turn out to be a 5-hour live stream. We're not going there. But you can see how the high, let's say the saturated green right here extends and is a little bit more saturated on the higher end of the pH spectrum as opposed to the lower end. Okay. So I hope I interpreted that comment correctly. Anywho, so what I want to do is, as we go through this, make sure that I don't lose track of you guys. Make sure that I can, let me just reduce this window, clear my desktop because it could get a little bit messy. What else is new? Anyway, so what I want to do as we go through this is just touch upon briefly the different components as we go through nitrogen, phosphorus, and all that stuff. And we'll go and start with nitrogen right at the top. Let me change the window as well, where I have highlighted the check mark is green. It is a mobile nutrient. The X determines a non-mobile nutrient, in case I forget to mention that while I talk about the different components of what should be in our fertilizer. And if we don't have certain things, we'll just have to see if that is absolutely necessary, because there are some things that can be detrimental and block out other nutrients, etc. So should I not repeat? Mobile, immobile nutrient. Everything that is green is a mobile nutrient, and everything that is X'd out is an immobile nutrient, meaning the minute it is absorbed and it lands where it's supposed to land, it stays there. So no calcium, for example, would move to the end of the structures once the rest of the orchid has had its fill, and then eventually calcium will be deposited at the end of the structure. No, normally when it comes to an immobile nutrient, it is deposited where it is deposited, and that is where it stays. So when we talk about nitrogen as a mobile nutrient, it is essential for stems and leaves, which are a composition of amino acid, protein, and all that fun stuff, and chlorophyll. These help carry carbohydrates. So if you have a nitrogen toxicity, for example, you can, not only Fusarium or botrytis can cause orchid blooms to rot, but it could also be a sign of too much nitrogen. High concentrations of nitrogen are usually the result of over-fertilization or using a fertilizer that has a nitrogen content that is too high. Now, it doesn't mean that you're losing your blooms just because of that, but if you have too much nitrogen, and let's go to the extreme and call it toxicity, which, when I speak about toxicity or an excess of, when it comes to our orchids, always remember, very slow metabolism. And that is why orchids, as a rule, do not need that much fertilizer compared to, let's say, a faster growing house plant. So that is why we always say our parts per million are ridiculously low in comparison to other plants out there. So toxicity doesn't mean death. It just means excess of. Anyway, the excess of nitrogen can also show in abnormally dark leaves based on what the orchid should look like, curled down leaf tips at the end, yellowing leaves, fertilizer burn, leaf tip dieback, and worst case scenario, spots on leaves which have nothing to do with any kind of fungi. And orchids with too much nitrogen become more attractive to insects and diseases, seeing as it causes rapid growth, and without the balance of light and temperature to match, it reduces the strength of the structures. Haha, an invitation for the bugs to get hold and all that yucky stuff. Now, before you mention calcium, we will get there because, strength of structures, etc. Balance is a big factor when it comes to nutrition. And that is why, again, pH is kind of important here. Anyway, the deficiency of nitrogen, the whole plant ends up looking pale to yellowish green. Very early, let's say, dieback of leaves that shouldn't die back that soon. The entire plant looks pale, and with very severe symptoms, larger leaves turn from pale green to yellow and white. I do, as a matter of fact, have a picture of that because my Laelia pacavia is doing exactly that. There's nothing I can do about it at this point in time to correct it. Thankfully, nitrogen is a mobile nutrient. Everything is being pushed to the front, and what is happening is at the back. Still, my word from before, it weakens the plant. In general, I am already using up storage organs in the back. I've got probably 10, maybe 12 weeks to go. I think we should be okay. Right, now, phosphorus, mobile nutrient, is responsible for the part of your orchid beneath the surface of the pot. It encourages healthy root systems and is responsible for beautiful blooms. And it is stored in new growth while they are young, as well as spikes. So too much, when we go back to too much, what is the excess? What are the signs of an excess of phosphorus? There will be leaf discoloration. The leaf between the veins will turn yellow or dark. And most studies of phosphorus toxicity have been conducted on economically valuable crops, not necessarily on orchids, but these symptoms will also apply to orchids. Too much phosphorus can also lock out the absorption of nitrogen, zinc, and iron. Okay, so now we're starting to meet. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Yum, yum. Le chef is at work. Thank you so much. I appreciate that you dropped by. So here we're already seeing signs of how the excess of one will start to lock out, as in block, the absorption of another. All right? Now, I'm going to just add in here, maybe in my little script earlier, I should have put in a disclaimer. I'm going to add here that none of this is normal that we cannot correct. We're talking about mobile nutrients. So everything that is green is correctable within a certain period of time. By the time we see symptoms, we can adapt and adjust accordingly. As far as phosphorus is concerned, it is an important factor. That's why it's one of the 3 that we normally see on fertilizers, even if we're talking houseplants. But to get to the point of toxicity because we've used too much is very, very rare. However, deficiencies could be a little bit more often because as we purchase orchids over the internet, if we don't get the chance to buy them and handle them and look at them personally, deficiencies could be a little bit more frequent. And we would be looking for brown leaves or leaves tinged with purple, bronze, or red, not the look of anthocyanin if your orchid is warm enough, not exposed to too much light, etc. So looking more for the brown leaves. If you think purple, oh, my orchid is getting too much light, you might be inclined to move it back. See if it improves because anthocyanin can be corrected relatively quickly. If it doesn't go away, it's possibly a phosphorus deficiency. In addition to that, it's not just one symptom. Certain things have to somehow come together to make a determined diagnosis. So stunted leaves where the growth and the leaf surface are underdeveloped. A delay in the development of young roots also causes difficulty for the water and nutrient uptake. So if left untreated, leaves can develop brown spots and necrosis. Again, nothing to do with a fungus. It could possibly be a phosphorus deficiency if you see it, for example, on new growths like that. If the rest of the orchid is looking great, you don't want the browning of the leaves. Now, we will get to the calcium part, but before we get there, we've got to also discuss potassium because NPK, potassium, is the last of the 3 major ones we normally see. So potassium is crucial for the orchid's overall health. This nutrient helps plants deal with stresses associated with temperature, disease, and insects. It controls the stomata, the absorption of nitrogen, and is the transport vehicle, let's say, public transportation here, which moves the nutrients to where the orchid needs. So a lot of nitrogen hops on, combines with the potassium, and off they go together to where the orchid needs it. The concentration of potassium should always be similar to nitrogen concentration, with the exception of high light orchids, which will need higher nitrogen than potassium. So, highlight orchids, Cattleyas, Vandas. You want to be careful with how much potassium they're getting during their growth spurt. You want to make sure that in that case, there's more nitrogen than potassium. In all of this, again, I'm going to slip in another thought that I've got. When we talk about orchid-specific fertilizers, they pretty much balance themselves out. So there is no need to start to think, I'm going to have to, up my nitrogen. Now I'm going to need a separate nitrogen component and do a separate nitrogen soak so that it doesn't, so the potassium doesn't cancel out the nitrogen. Please know that if you're using an orchid-specific fertilizer, all the work has pretty much been done for you. There may be different ratios and percentages within the potassium towards the nitrogen, but pretty much it's all been done. If you have a conventional fertilizer where the first three, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium are all the same, then use those during your growth phase of your orchid, if that is what you choose to do. And then obviously, in my opinion, bring the doses, the concentration down to at least a quarter, at least a half, if not a quarter, depending on so many factors, but that's not what we're talking about here today. But you see where I'm coming from here with regards to the pH. If any of these nutrients that we see on the chart are not being absorbed because the pH is wrong, deficiencies will start to happen. And we need to be able to pinpoint what is going on. And the pH meter is super, super important in this case. I'm not even talking about how much you need to fertilize your orchids. That is a personal thing. But when it comes to deficiencies, the only way that we can determine that is knowing what are we pHing the solution that is going into the pot. And we're not even talking about organic media or inorganic media or alfresco just yet. First of all, we're going to move to our first immobile nutrient, which is sulfur. This is as necessary as phosphorus and is considered an essential mineral, even though it's not really one of the, three musketeers that we always see. But it helps to form important enzyme and assists in the formation of plant proteins. So too much sulfur, high concentrations of sulfur can cause an increase in salts. Now, fertilizer, let's say an over-fertilizing will always cause an increase in salts. However, if a fertilizer has a higher percentage of sulfur in it, let's say, than another one, then it is very important to question your environment and is your orchid able to do what it's supposed to do 365 days a year when you use a high sulfur concentrated fertilizer. In my climate where I have to go by seasons and temperature drops, etc., this kind of a fertilizer could cause super, super important problems in my collection during the winter months where I am not fertilizing, if I dare say, at all, or in such minute quantities, I'm really only just tiding them over, just ticking them over. Julie-san, hey, it's good to see you. Good morning, good morning. I hope that your Saturday is starting off beautifully. So, when we say cause an increase in salts, just know it depends on the time of year, whether there is an increase in salts. It depends on how quickly and vigorous your orchid is, but sulfur is important. Again, the formation of plant proteins, we need those. Anyway, So the accumulation of any kind of sulfur, let's go back to the excess of sulfur. If your orchid hasn't actually absorbed sulfur enough, depending on what you're giving your orchid, an excess of that is going to be that your plant becomes stunted and it will be dark in color as the result of salt damage. Dark meaning not necessarily the foliage getting dark, but it'll change. It's going to look a little bit like somebody has, painted the watercolor and it's a bright green, and then they take a little bit of a black, and then with the water, they mix in a little bit of black over the leaf. It just goes a little bit dark, muted color. But you also need to then correlate that it's going to be stunted. However, if we have salt buildup in our pots, look, at the end of the day, we will see the accumulation already happening at the surface of the pot. So it's not as if this is ever really going to happen. Again, excess is something that's very rarely going to happen. And, if we don't flush for 8 to 10 months and we keep fertilizing, well, I hope you can grow your orchids outdoors and let it rain that it does flush sometimes. But not flushing, this could be an issue. Still, worse off is deficiency. Again, wrong pH over a considerable amount of time, deficiencies will occur. They are more detrimental than any danger of excess would be in everything that I'm talking about today. Sulfur deficient orchids are often pale green, yellow green, or completely yellow. Good morning, Orchid Ninja Sharon-san. It's good to see you. So, pale green, yellowish green to completely yellow. Not to be confused with Laelia purpuratas that are growing well simply because they're in a high light exposed area. Laelia purpurata leaves will go yellowish green, should be yellowish green. Some, like mine, are completely yellow. And if there is no deficiency, let's say in sulfur, I can also say that during the low light phase, what they're dealing with now, bit by bit, some of the back leaves are picking up and getting more dark in their color. Their green is coming back. So that is not to be confused with the light levels and how an orchid's characteristics are naturally. Just because you've got yellow leaves doesn't mean the orchid is sulfur deficient. So know your orchid as well. But these characteristics are also similar to characteristics of nitrogen deficient plants and observed in their younger leaves. So here we have a deficiency that cannot be pulled from the back because it is immobile nutrient. All right. Mobile nutrients, we will see deficiencies from the older structures to the newer structures. Usually the newer structures are all doing fine and the back is struggling. That is because they are mobile and they're pulling the nutrients towards the front where everything's growing nicely. If you have an immobile nutrient like sulfur, the opposite is true. And the fact is, it's going to show straight away on new leaves. Once again, the Laelia purpurata example, it'll be the older leaves that are yellow and the front leaves are nice and green. That is normal. And if the front leaf was all yellow, we would have to analyze what is going on with that plant. Okay. Now, our next big yellowing factor, maybe not, also possibly black, is calcium. Another immobile nutrient that is super important for our orchids. It is vital for building cell walls, amongst other things. But really, it is the mineral that will determine the overall strength and longevity of any new growth, including years gone by, older growths. Because once that element is locked in place, that is where it stays. And if older growths are there, then they will have the calcium of yesteryear stored in their structures. So it is absorbed like many other things through the root tips and pulled through the plant via the xylem during the transpiration process, and then it is transported from the roots to the leaves and newly growing parts of the plant. That is the main focus of any orchid when it gets calcium. calcium absorbed like a sponge straight away to the front of the orchid, because we will assume that the back of the orchid has plenty, and if the back of the orchid doesn't have plenty, it won't make any difference whatsoever to the front. So too much, an excess of calcium can look, did I just say look? An excess of calcium can lock out adequate absorption of magnesium. Now, here we have another component that is actually a good thing. We need lots of it, but if we do too much of it, it'll lock another very, very important element out, which is magnesium, which we will get to, meaning that if we put too much calcium in the orchid, too much magnesium, all at the same time, calcium's going to take precedent. It'll lock out the magnesium. We think we've applied everything that we need to make our orchid look great, chlorophyll, photosynthesize, grow strong, and yet we are observing a magnesium deficiency at the back of the orchid, and we're going, what is going on here? Well, magnesium, as you can see with a green check mark, is a mobile nutrient. If we have too much calcium and there's an imbalance, the magnesium is locked out, well, the orchid's going to pull it from the back structures. All right, so when I say in my videos, for example, I try to either do one or the other separately all the time, calcium soak or magnesium soak, I don't mix my Epsom salts with my calcium nitrate because I'm not that much of an expert, and I would be totally freaking out. What did I do? What is the ratio? What did I have the right percentage? Never mind my pH. So I go and take it easy, do what the work's already been done for me. I take a CalMag supplement where the balance is correct, where the risk of locking magnesium out is not going to be the case. Right, so, excuse me. The deficiency, a lack of sufficient calcium is, horrible. It will result in the reduced vigor of the orchid at its growing point, and that is the last thing we want. It'll easily allow rot to occur on new growths, and it will, because it's weakening the tender cell walls, and sometimes can be wrongly diagnosed as a potassium deficiency, seeing as the two have a similar effect. Now, potassium deficiency, as I mentioned earlier, is not that big of a deal because normally our balanced fertilizers will have plenty of potassium in it, being one of the three musketeers right there on the label, NPK, blah, blah, blah. But calcium is not in every fertilizer. It is not even in every orchid-specific fertilizer, and it should be. If you buy an orchid-specific fertilizer and there is no calcium in it, I ask the manufacturer, why not? Because many times we rely on the product on the shelf that we buy and we think we're doing a great thing. And then the most important component to ensure successful growth at the most crucial point of our orchid, the front of it with a new growth, it fails. So that's where the supplements come in. And it doesn't matter if you supplement with calcium or magnesium. I'm going to try and keep everything separate. It doesn't matter if you supplement with calcium only, or magnesium only, or CalMag as a product. If your orchid fertilizer has calcium and magnesium in it, makes absolutely no difference. The only thing I always say is do not mix, because one CalMag product that is perfectly balanced for a single application at that point in time at the right pH, mixed with a fertilizer that is built around its own balance with calcium and magnesium, there could be a clash, and it could be that probably magnesium is locked out, seeing as calcium is the bully, and calcium should be the bully because calcium, it is important. I can't express that enough. Now, when I do my soaks right at the beginning of the season after they've been deprived for so long, I take calcium nitrate separately, and everybody gets a calcium nitrate soak. It doesn't matter to me at this point in time if my orchids are in active growth. The reason I do that is because due to my conditions, my orchids are starving. I think they're starving. They're not, but I believe they're starving because normally, excuse me, normally they get la, 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 so much, so much, so much, and then for 3 to 4 months, it's like I've slammed the brakes on. And then it's like, oh, please don't hate me. But oh boy, when it comes to April, and even if my night temperatures are too low yet for them to be outside, by April, the light has increased. I am hitting them with calcium nitrate to be ready for action when action kicks off, or to help them out at the point that they started getting active in March, where it's still too dangerous to hit them with calcium nitrate because I don't have the light levels to match. Because there's one thing you do not want to have happen when you fertilize your orchids. You think you're going to grow the most beautiful new growths. Yay! You're going to do what you see on the internet. Everybody's showing off their most shiny, spanking new growth. And you're like, yes, I'm going to do this. And yeah, you don't have enough light to match. Your structures will bolt. They will grow weak, as we mentioned about too much nitrogen. And if we cannot get the calcium in there fast enough, the cell structures will not be strong. The whole thing is just going to look wonderful straight out of the gate. And then it will fail. All right? Anything out of the ordinary, for example, if you're dependent on certain circumstances in your climate, a cold snap for just that one night, even if your orchids aren't outside, those tender little growths will not hold without the additional calcium. So make sure that when you use your fertilizer, that it either has calcium in it, or if it doesn't, that you do supplement. It is fundamental. If you're finding that your new growths aren't really pulling their weight, so to speak, it's possible that there is a calcium deficiency in there, okay? So don't worry about the Three Musketeer deficiencies, seeing as they're always high in their percentage in a fertilizer mix. Start to think about the immobile nutrients as sulfur and magnesium, and when we get to the micronutrients there that are all, for the most part, immobile, those are the ones we really need to somewhat hone in on. Speaking of micro and macronutrients, right now, the whole top that we see all the way down to magnesium, all of that are macronutrients. Yes, I have to think because I have dyslexic tendencies and I like to flip things around. Because why not? My life is a pancake. Or sunny side up on eggs, depending on how you like it. But yeah, so the macronutrients are the ones that are fundamental. We cannot ignore them. There's no going out and saying, yeah, no, I'm not. Yeah, the magnesium. Yeah, not really. No, not today. Not for another 8 months. Nah, not happening. We can't go down that road. When we talk about the micronutrients, which we're going to get into now, we still have to touch magnesium, but when we get into the micronutrients, again, the metabolism of an orchid is so slow that we don't need much. Micro, already defines it. The trace elements. And then we talk about 100 parts per million because we're addressing a seedling and we have our orchid-specific fertilizer that has all the little micronutrients listed, and we're talking 100 parts per million. And then you look at the percentage of the micronutrients. Look, no, they're not really going to factor in. But I am going to address them because sometimes people talk about iron deficiencies and then, they try to compensate and add iron, and then but they're going to lock out another nutrient. So I will address the micronutrients just for the point of interest. Okay, so we've done we're on to magnesium. That's what I said. Right. Now, magnesium, one of my favorite elements because it's just so easy to correct. Usually when we correct magnesium deficiencies, we correct a plethora of other things and everything just moves on smoothly. However, again, it takes a lot longer to correct a deficiency than it does to actually see a deficiency manifesting itself. So 7 to 8 months. What's going on? That's usually the time frame a new growth is maturing. That by that time frame, if there's a deficiency, that is when we will see a deficiency occurring. Yes, it's good to bathe in. Absolutely. Makes me want to have a bath with my orchids. Wouldn't that be a sight? You coming in on my summer bloomers with me in the tub. Let's soak and check the pH. So yeah, anyway, 7 months to see a deficiency occurring, and it can take years to correct it. All right. Anywho, orchids will use magnesium mainly to conduct the process of photosynthesis. This means that most of the magnesium will be stored in the orchid's leaves, where light that reaches the leaves will be converted into chemical energy. And yes, I wrote that because there is no way I would have been able to repeat that in my brain. My brain sees the word chemical, it goes tilt, and it doesn't capture or absorb anything. Just like if we don't pH correctly, we won't absorb, our orchids won't absorb anything either correctly. Now, let's go. So I read that. Anyway, an overdose of magnesium, is that even possible? Yes, it is. If you see a deficiency of magnesium coming along, the first thing is panic. Magnesium, Epsom salt, high, get it really up there in the parts per million, soak, possibly wrong pH. Then we have a toxicity of magnesium, and that blocks out the absorption of calcium. It reduces the absorption of nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and zinc. So, yikes. I mean, now what? Hakuna Matata. It is easy to overdose on magnesium because we panic and we can correct it, and we want to correct it as fast as possible. Keep one thing in mind always. The metabolism of orchids is super slow. It cannot recover within a growing season. It may, if the orchid is small. But if it's an oversized orchid and you're seeing deficiencies way back in the structure, it is possible that it's already a little bit too late for that structure. Accept the fact that structure has served its purpose and it'll probably fall off, especially if it's a leaf on a phalaenopsis. But too much, too quickly, and then we add our fertilizer in the next go around, it will not work. First of all, always use magnesium, any kind of supplementing of magnesium Epsom salts on their own. Adding a scoop of magnesium to boost whatever is in your fertilizer, like I said, unless you're a chemist, scientist, or somebody has given you a recipe that your specific fertilizer will work with 1 tablespoon or 5 grams of magnesium and nothing will get locked out. Please, for the sake of just being safe and not sorry, always administer magnesium in the form of Epsom salts or whatever product separately from any other fertilizer. Now, once you've had that soak or whatever, however you administer your Epsom salts, and you've flushed your pot and your orchid is in active growth, by all means, then put your fertilizer in, but don't put magnesium in with your fertilizer thinking either you may be cutting corners because you don't have time. Then at least forfeit the fertilizer and do what needs to be done and only use the magnesium. Now, the deficiency, of course, we know very, very well. The leaves turn greenish yellow, either as a solid color. The whole leaf may just turn greenish yellow. Again, not to be confused with the culture of an orchid and light levels, what it needs, like Alelia purpurata. That's not what I mean. But a leaf can turn greenish yellow. It will mainly, though, be seen in lighter, uneven blotches where you're thinking, what's this? Why are you looking like that? And usually you can see it like if you hold the leaf or the orchid up to the light. in a different way, not necessarily just a backlight. Sometimes we can't get a light behind the leaf, but it will catch your eye. And you think, first of all, that maybe you've got a pest underneath, you lift the leaf, there are no pests, nothing sucking anything out of the cells of your orchids. It's just a blotchy little light, a color, an unevenness about it. That is magnesium deficiency. Okay? And older structures will show signs of the deficiency because the magnesium, again, is mobile. It is mobilized. The orchid recognizes, woohoo, we're growing. Boo, they haven't given us enough of this. Yay, we've got older structure. Let's get a move on. Bring that magnesium to the front. All right, so again, mobile nutrients, check the back end and see what's going on. The front will always look mighty fine. Do not be distracted by shiny new growths. Check the back of your orchid. Right. Micronutrients is an immobile nutrient when we get to iron. Ooh. All right. Iron. Yeah, Iron Man. Let's go. It can be, this is how I wrote it down, it can be considered the assistant manager to magnesium, who is the general manager of chlorophyll production and photosynthesis. I hope that analogy works. The reason is it is a necessary component of our fertilizer and that it helps with the vibrancy of the blooms and the chlorophyll production in the structure. So you need a little bit of iron to help the general manager out and boost the activities of the business to get that chlorophyll production going in the structures. Too much iron doesn't leave a bad taste in your mouth. If you take too many of your iron supplements, I don't mean that, but it will result in stunted growth. The structures will appear small, have a sick look about them. If something doesn't look quite right, you can't really put your finger on it, but something is off. Sometimes people say, I think my orchid's got Fusarium. Yeah, wait a minute. Not necessarily. Stunted growth, something not looking quite right. When it comes to Fusarium, you need another lot of factors to accumulate what it is and diagnose correctly. So if your roots are growing fine, but something isn't looking right, it could cause the bronzing of the leaves, add to that a little bit of discoloration of the leaves, the leaf color turning brown, red. Yeah, and it's at the front because it is immobile. So if these things are accumulating at the front, the newest growth, newest structure, it is possible it's an iron deficiency. Very, very rare when it comes to orchids. By the time you have an iron deficiency, everything else is already deficient, meaning calcium. Well, that is the first thing that's going to go. You rarely see iron deficiency because by that time the growth is gone, but not because of iron, because of calcium. Okay, so manganese, also immobile. The metabolic rate of manganese makes this an important micronutrient because it plays a big role in the nitrate-reducing enzyme activity and activation of enzyme, which in turn play roles on carbohydrate metabolism. My reading skills are improving. Again, no way I would have been able to do that just out of the blue. Anyway, fertilizers containing manganese increase the efficiency of photosynthesis and carbohydrate synthesis, such as starch, sugars, etc., which our orchids need. So too much of that, and we'll get to our next micronutrient, but like boron toxicity, the prominent symptom of manganese toxicity is the appearance of brown spots surrounded by chlorotic veins, pale, yellow in color, but most severe, again, on the younger structures, younger leaves, because immobile. Okay? Deficiencies, the photosynthesis efficiency decreases with manganese deficiency. However, like I said earlier on when we were approaching the subject of magnesium, by the time we see photosynthesis efficiency decreasing, we've already somewhat diagnosed a magnesium deficiency. So we don't normally see a manganese deficiency in orchids. But it's interesting to know that manganese, photosynthesis, yeah, they go hand in hand. One helps the other. So let me just check my notes here. How can manganese deficiencies be avoided, seeing as it is a micronutrient and these are only trace elements in our fertilizers? So that's the questions that I wrote down for myself, and I answered it as follows. Go easy on the magnesium supplementation, seeing as the uptake of the manganese is decreased by overdoing it in applications of magnesium. Again, we want to make sure that we keep our elements separate when we're supplementing. If all this is combined, my fertilizer, for example, has everything that I've listed here in it all combined at the right percentage. If you're using a conventional fertilizer at half or quarter strength, you may not have calcium. You may not have all the micronutrients at the right percentages. However, you can always supplement with magnesium. You can't really get a product out there. I think in hydroponics, you could get a product that is based solely on manganese, but you don't want to use that on its own because it's going to go right for the magnesium and say, hello, you've got competition. I'm going to cancel you out. All right. So knowing that these are micronutrients, knowing that we are using very low parts per million trace elements, I can't say that even more. Micro, trace, everything points to small, small, small. You can't overdose on manganese. So, being an immobile nutrient, you would see any deficiency on the younger leaves again, but a deficiency, I would be just more careful with the magnesium, and the manganese takes care of itself. So let's see. The young leaves of manganese-deficient orchids will exhibit intervenal chlorosis with a relative wide area of green associated with the veins, but the leaves do not become cream in color, if that makes sense to anybody. Again, I could not find an orchid-deficient image on the internet to show you that has a manganese deficiency. Everything else is out in the landscape. All right? You may get leaves and growths that are contorted, and the plants may be reduced in size, have some necrotic spots that are tan or gray. These are all symptoms. If you go with a manganese deficiency and look it up on the internet, you'll see trees, you'll see shrubs, you'll see crops with manganese deficiency. Nothing I could see on the internet that showed a specific orchid with this because magnesium. But as we move on to boron, now, boron is a micronutrient, but its importance cannot be underestimated. So the essential elephant, excuse me, Dumbo here. The essential element that is classified as a micronutrient, because it doesn't need much, but it is super important. It's one of the most important essential elements because it plays a massive role in all the plant nutrition. Because the main functions of boron have to do with the development of cell walls. Hello, calcium. They derive much of their strength from the element boron. Again, hello, calcium. So cell division, fruit, and seed development are also heavily dependent on the presence of sufficient boron levels, not just out in the fields or in the landscape, but definitely in our orchids, because it also helps, this is a subject I like, the processes of hormone development, as well as moving sugars throughout the roots, stem, leaves of the plant, etc. It helps with the cell wall structure as it is involved in the movement of calcium into the plant. So boron is the public bus transportation system for calcium. The two of them go hand in hand. Now, calcium doesn't need that much boron to get its move on, but dang if it's not there. Yes, I know. I just flew out of the circus there, Robert. But calcium and boron, they're like they're hitched on the same wagon. Whereas calcium might carry the higher weight. If it wasn't for boron, it wouldn't get shifted up to where it belongs. So, in my mind, obviously now I'm thinking, I can do a little bit better. I can do better. I need more boron because then my more calcium will be going to the new growth. And I'm just a hormone nut when it comes to growing orchids using hormones, trying to tweak things. Hey, process of hormone development, boron is super importante and moving the sugars and all that fun stuff. But too much, the typical symptoms of toxicity from excess boron is the yellowing of the leaf margins and tips and sometimes between the veins. So the symptoms progress to necrosis and a premature drop of the leaves. Okay, now I haven't experienced that yet. And if we get to that point, I do have some images. I know that it is a nitrogen deficiency, but the yellowing leaf margins, I could give you a visual of that with one of my orchids, and also blackening that then happens, but that's nitrogen. Still, the symptoms are the same if there is an excess of boron in the orchid as such, as a toxicity kind of, let's say, verbiage. But deficiency, haha, hello calcium, leaves will start to turn yellow as well as at the tips where the new growth will start, and then it will wither away. Okay? Calcium and boron, they're a match made in heaven. But you don't want the bully calcium to get too much boron, because then there's going to be all sorts of issues, and pretty much what you're thinking you're going to do with the calcium is create strong growths. Too much boron is going to come in and say, watch me, hold my beer. So you don't want that, okay? But again, these micronutrients, we're talking really, really small doses in our orchids and the fertilizers that we use, so it should really never be an issue. But it's a good thing to know that while they work in harmony to build the cells, and boron is super important for the hormones, etc., it could be the devil when it comes to wanting to claim its space, and calcium cannot take hold, and then you will have exactly what you don't want: yellowing new growths, and then poof, that is the end of your new growth. Copper, and I'm not talking fungicide. Do not ever use copper as a fungicide. Goodbye, Vanda Denisoniana. Yes, she has left the building today. Anyway, too much copper, immobile nutrient. High levels of copper can be toxic to plants. Once again, I am not talking a fungicide, but copper is an element that we should find in some fertilizers. Well, in my orchid fertilizer, it is. If we have copper toxicity, it is the orchid. Oh, not that it happened to me. I have not over-fertilized on copper. I've done other things with copper that aren't pretty, but they are a resemblance, a reminder. And yes, it is true. Low vigor in new growth, and it locks out the absorption of iron, resulting in iron deficiency. So easy on the copper. If you've got it in your fertilizer, happy days. If you don't, Hakuna Matata. Don't add it, ever. There is nothing as tiny as copper to be supplementing an orchid with the copper element. I see copper, I see red, I just go, ah! So I have it in my fertilizer, and they know what they're doing, and I'm just like, thank you, moving on, okay? But copper toxicity, if you should see something happening, maybe also in your landscape, could be helpful. In the orchids, however, it would display as stunted growths. And here we go. No surprises here. The stunted growths are usually bluish in color. You know, copper, hello. Or you'll see that. Not a brown, not a bronze, not a red, bluish in color. And eventually turn yellow or brown. And seeing as it is an immobile nutrient, the new growths will suffer weak cells, enter pests, and possibly end up rotting as a result of slow metabolism. Once again, our orchids don't grow very fast. Even if we were trying to correct the problem of copper toxicity, it's not going to happen fast enough. It's done. The growth is done. Hopefully, the orchid will recover, because unfortunately, copper toxicity also has a resulting effect of slowing down and stunting growths. And that means that stuff, if it's in there too long, no matter how much you flush it, it's in the orchid, and it's just not going to come out. And once again, I'm not talking about fungicide, but I am kind of. They kind of work together. So don't worry about it. If you don't have it in your fertilizer, that's fine. Don't supplement with it, okay? The deficiency, don't worry about that. Because again, if you don't have it in your fertilizer, you've got plenty of other goodies in your fertilizer that are going to counteract any copper deficiency before it can even manifest itself, because it would present itself as a form of chlorosis with weak growth and poor root growth. However, you've got all the other good stuff with the macronutrients in your fertilizer and you're good to go. Copper, literally, as far as I'm concerned, can exit stage left. We're all okay. Watch somebody. If you disagree, let me know in the comments. If you're watching in replay, let me know the benefits, the extension, how extensive are the benefits of copper in an orchid fertilizer. I have yet to find one. As far as I'm concerned, I would prefer something else. Give me something else. Give me a little bit more iron, for example. I don't know. Boron. Give me boron. All right, zinc. It's good stuff. It's good stuff, not just for us human, but it is good stuff. It's a good element to have in our fertilizer. It is an important component of various enzymes that are responsible for driving many metabolic reactions within our orchids. Metabolic reactions, our orchids grow in snooze mode compared to other plants. So zinc is relatively important because without zinc, they'll snooze even longer. So too much of it, however, will result in locking out iron and magnesium. All right, so don't think what I'm telling you here because I'm calling it important means let me go get some zinc and let me supplement. No, it's a micronutrient, okay? If it's in your fertilizer, great, it's there with the right amount of percentage as required, balancing out whatever else is in your fertilizer. You don't want to be locking out iron and magnesium. Then, if you do that, in turn, that will cause those components to start their symptoms of deficiency. So before you even realize you have a zinc deficiency, dyslexia, come on back, let's rewind. Before you even realize that you have an excess of zinc in your fertilizer, or you've done something and it's just gone a little bit, you were a bit heavy-handed, but over a very long period of time, again, I'm talking 7 months, we can make a mistake and, we'll know it for the next time. No biggie. This is a micronutrient. You would have to go like 7 months to 12 months to, you know what I mean. It's not going to happen. But you don't want to be locking out our precious magnesium and the iron, okay? So before we see anything like that, we would find a magnesium deficiency and take care of it. And then zinc would be out the window anyway because we're focusing on magnesium. All right, that's the toxicity if it's too much zinc. So the deficiency of zinc will result in the leaf of a new growth turning yellow, remaining small, it starts to look wrinkled, it looks dehydrated, even though the orchid may not be lacking in hydration. But again, it's an immobile nutrient. It's not going to come from the back and support the front. Any new growth that has any kind of issues, the first thing it's going to need is calcium, and the rest will take care of itself pretty much in a nutshell. So it's very rare that you're going to see a new growth decline because of the lack of zinc, all right? So the reason that happens, though, is carbohydrate, protein, and chlorophyll formation is significantly reduced in zinc-deficient plants. However, we've got magnesium. We're going to rely on magnesium to do the chlorophyll for us, including, the assistant manager for magnesium, manganese, as long as they don't compete for the position. The two can work in harmony. Everything's going to be fine. Very rarely is anything going to die as a new growth because of zinc deficiency. But this is a micro element that I love just because I know how to say it, molybdenum. I'm happy that came out so easily because goodness me, for years it has been a tongue twister for me. Anyway, we have a micronutrient. It's a mobile nutrient. Who knew? So molybdenum actually is a metal, but the metal in its molybdate form is essential for plants as a number of enzymes use it to catalyze most important reactions in the nitrogen acclimatization. It boosts the nitrogen. Hey, actually, it boosts the nitrogen metabolism within the nuclei of the cells. So not only is it a micronutrient, but it is a micronutrient, like teeny tiny, because it is actually active in the nuclei of the cells. But it is super important because it boosts the nitrogen metabolism, which is a macronutrient. And boy, do we love that stuff, especially when our orchids are in active growth. So bring on molybdenum. You don't need to supplement it, though. You don't want to supplement it, even if there is a product out there that you could supplement it. I don't know. I haven't checked. I don't want to be tempted. If I find it, just like with boron, I would be tempted. I'm not going to go there. So I'm just going to sneak back into my corner and pretend I don't know this information. The fact it's in my fertilizer, happy days. That's all I need to know. Anyway, too much of this stuff. It's extremely rare, but it is characterized by relatively mild symptoms, again, of yellowish leaves, or in seedlings, reduced growth and increased anthocyanin concentrations, but extremely rare. If we were to see it anywhere, we would probably see it, as mentioned just now, in seedlings. But normally, we're already working with the nitrogen. It doesn't really ever happen that often. Not so much in orchids anyway. A deficiency is detected on older, maturer growths. Once again, hello, mobile nutrient, older, maturer growths. It's going to be pulled to where it is needed if it's not being provided. So it will show in the leaf or leaves that are turning yellow at the petiole where the leaf meets the pseudobulb. That is where you will see yellowing. The pseudobulb itself may or may not. The leaf will be the first to go, change color, and then it will start to twist at that point in a kind of weird shape. I'm not saying like a curly whirly twist, but when you get cold damage on an orchid, your leaves start to maybe do a little bit of a turn, and you're like, yeah, maybe you should come inside. Hello, Prostechia. Yes, that would be me. Prostechia, when it starts to turn, and yeah, that would be a molybdenum deficiency, but you will probably never see that. First of all, if that were to happen, then you've already done something wrong with the nitrogen, which brings us to pH, because all of this, what I have just said, cannot, may happen if you don't pH correctly. So let's just address one thing really quickly: slow release fertilizers. All right, so we've just talked about an orchid specific fertilizer, wonderful stuff. Everything goes in the bucket and presto, perfect pH. Usually around, mine ends up at 6.7, and that sometimes, depending on the orchid I'm dealing with, I'm moving it up to 7 or 7.5 because of the different media and what I want that fertilizer concentration to do for my orchid. We'll get there. Slow release fertilizers, how do they weigh pH? You see where I'm going with slow release fertilizers? Now we have terrestrial orchids, and they're in the ground, and sprinkle some slow release fertilizer, and it activates when the soil warms up and water gets poured on, and slow release fertilizer does its magic. In a pot, however, now we may also have to now differentiate with slow release fertilizer and its effectiveness based on how big is the orchid, what is it supposed to do, what media is the orchid in, do I unpot on a regular basis, is the orchid constantly in the pot and I just sprinkle slow release fertilizer on it. Now, I don't have a problem against slow release fertilizer at all. I made some mistakes with it, but I still have some, and if I get my act together, I might use it again. But for right now, I'm sort of like, again, slinking off back into the corner and like, yeah, no, I don't think so, because it's unpredictable. Okay, now, in a big patch of lawn or somewhere in the landscape, if you have an orchid growing and like a cymbidium or a phaeus, or let's say patches of blatia, you can do, feed the chicken kind of sprinkle of slow release fertilizer and it's fine. And if I had that opportunity, that is exactly how I would use my slow release fertilizer. However, in a pot, my dosage and how I would apply it, I would, and then pH, are my orchids getting everything? Over what period of time? Those are all the questions after the mistake I made with my application of slow to release fertilizer that I have in my head that at this point in time I cannot answer. And I'm not going to put recommendations out there unless I can clearly say this size pot, this media, this time of year, active, inactive growth, and on and on and on. And then measure your pH depending on how you want to. With a soak, check the runoff. In the reservoir, if you're self-watering, tilt out the reservoir if you're semi-hydro. All of that needs to be taken into consideration, pH and TDS. So I'm just going to say it is an option, and it's a fantastic option for right now, I can only put my hand in the fire to say terrestrial orchids in the landscape. Take it away. Go with a slow release fertilizer, happy days. Anything in a pot, I'd be super careful. Super, super careful. And if you know more about slow release fertilizers, handling and concentration, etc., in a pot, if you're on replay, if you're in the chat, let me know in the comments. I would be super interested because, like I said, I am not opposed to it. It's just that personally, I shy away from recommending doing anything like that in the pot because I cannot give you simple 1, 2, 3 ABC directives of what's going to be a good, happy medium, let's say for 80% of the orchids that we do grow in pot that are not terrestrial. All right. So I just want to make sure that I address that in case anybody asks. But hey, take it away in the comments if you're on replay or in the chat, and let's talk about it. Maybe not on this live stream. Maybe we can do a separate live stream addressing all these different points, just so that I don't go too long, because staring at this screen, I wonder if you're thinking like, yeah, snooze fest. Anyway, now, what I wanted to do with regards to pH is address a few certain things, okay? When you look at the chart, I'm going to see if I can get my little pointy thing out. When we look at the chart, let me see if I can still see the chat. You can see how I've structured it. I don't want to reduce it. I still got to see you guys. You guys can go over here, over to my left, peeking over my shoulder there. Awesome, awesome. Now I see you. I don't need that. Here we go. All right, so the way I've structured it, so you've had plenty of time to look at it. You've probably figured it out, but just in case, humor me. Okay, so we've got strong acid to the left, and the lowest that I've gone with is 4 pH, and then we've got strong alkaline to the right. The highest I've gone with 9, and we can go all the way, all the way. But for our orchids, this is mainly what we need, and we don't even need to go to 9 because, yeah, you see, I've got my stop signal right here. In my recommendation, my little book of do's and don'ts, anything above 8, pH down. If it's your rainwater, if it's your snow, if it's anything that you're putting into your orchids and in its raw form, even if you've put your fertilizer or your supplements in and it shoots above 8, pH down, please. Get it to below 8. And that is when we can see, even with normal rainwater, for example, that it's just not a good idea we're not even talking supplements or fertilizer. It's just not a good idea to go above 8. And the reason I'm saying that is because when I moved into this property, I was extremely lucky in my second orchid collection that I was using tap water and everything was fine. And I wasn't pHing, I wasn't checking TDS. Sijui, I just went, water, you need it, here we go. Drink. I came to this property and I was running, what is going on with my roots? And I was trying to hydrate aerial roots, and I took cotton discs and I dunked them into the water and I wrapped the aerial roots and they just shriveled up and died. And that is when I thought, right, enough already. So enter pH meter. And I just thought, well, I have no rhyme or reason. But when I saw that my water was 8.5 and sometimes 10, if we're long periods of drought, 10, Probably now it's pretty clean because we've had so much rain. But anyway, yeah, I was like, yeah, that doesn't look right. That doesn't feel right. So do not. Or if you do, let me know. If it works for you, let me know how it works for you. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. Do not go above 8. But what you can see is that the saturation of the green increases a little bit as we get from 8 to 7. And that is because this is a good pH range for many, many things. Basically, if your rainwater comes out at 7.5, 7.8, have a way, use it. Don't do the malarkey with a pH meter. Just, over and over and over again. If you've got 7.8, use your rainwater. Great, good stuff. Now, if you add your fertilizer into your rainwater, then it should drop. At least my orchid-specific fertilizer drops the pH. However, you may find that your orchid-specific fertilizer put into rainwater that is within this bracket is only going to shift the bar over to the left a little bit. Now we're going to look at all the nice little components that we have, and we can see how everything is skinny over here, all right? If we're going to go with, let's say, 7.5, usually my fertilizer drops only about 0.3 of pH from its starting point. So, if I have my rainwater at 8, I add my fertilizer, I get down to 7.7. Yeah. There's not really much absorption going on. I hope that you can see my little hand going up, how skinny the bars peter out. That's not for design purposes. I mean, it looks pretty, I think, but that is not for design purposes. It's to show the low levels of concentration of all the ingredients and components in a fertilizer at a pH of 7.7. So in this case, you would need to pH down. Now, let's just pH down and think we have a very old orchid. We're not even talking about fresh organic media. We have an old orchid that is in, oh, no, poor thing, she's not old. Let's take the example of a new orchid, but she is in old media. Right, so we know that media goes acidic, and if you don't, well, old media goes acidic if it's organic. So now we're coming into a pH range where we're thinking, yeah, I've got to get into the ideal pH range where everything is fat, the green is saturated, and so on and so forth. I got to get my orchid, my pH all the way down here to 6.5, around 5.8. Ooh, but the media is old. Let's just say that you don't even know that the media is old because your orchid is new. Why would you think you've got old media? You just got a new orchid. It makes no sense. And you pH down here. Now, the old media is acidic, meaning the moment you pour that water into the pot, our bar, instead of being a beautiful 6.5 that we want it to be, slides all the way down to here. Let's just say, we'll just go, we won't exaggerate, but let's just say it slides to where the micronutrients are all fat and chubby. Woohoo! Okay. That's great for that time. And the next time you do it again, afterwards, you go again to your 6.5, magic 6.5 that you've been told about. And again, you're targeting the micronutrients. And you keep doing that. Look at where you've got your nitrogen, your phosphorus, your potassium. They're skinny. Yes, your orchid is still getting them. There are still elements that are being absorbed, but not enough. The micronutrients are trace, again, minute, tiny. There's not much in it. We don't fertilize our orchids that heavily. So this is really, you're at this point, the orchid is starving. Do you mind? Excuse you. At this point, the orchid is starving. All right? So when it comes to getting a new orchid, always err on the side of caution, in my opinion, that the media is rubbish. The media is broken down. Even if you don't touch it, if you don't look at it, if you don't know anything else, just go with the fact the media is rubbish. So what you need to do is make sure that if you're going to pH your water and your nutrient solution has dropped, because that's what happens, now you need to raise the pH and bring it up to counteract the acidity in the pot to a 7 to 8 pH ratio. Now, if you're not comfortable with going all the way to 8, because that just sounds foreign, I get it. And I understand, but go to 7.5, okay? Because by the time you pour that water into the pot, let's just reduce, again, the 0.3 of pH that mine does, and that's the only reference that I have. But let's just go there. Now we have arrived in a section where our bars of the macronutrients are super fat. We are at 6.7, which is absolutely great for the absorption of all the good stuff, the heavy stuff, the important stuff that our orchid needs. And usually our new orchids is in bloom. So, if you're going to starve the orchid, the first thing that's going to go is the blooms. And the next thing that's going to go are the leaves, the structures, because they are moving. They are constantly moving. So if we starve our orchid, it'll start pulling all the nutrients that can be pulled to the top, to the front, depending what orchid it is. And then we start losing the back structures. And we don't want that because, again, in event of an emergency, we will need those structures to help the orchid recover. And I'm talking also with my poor little insolence in the back of my mind. So going to 7.5 is not a bad pH. You are on the safe side, including if your media is brand spanking new, depending what time of year you are watering and fertilizing. If the pot doesn't dry out quick enough, then your pH is going to drop for the duration of that pot staying wet, even when it is new media. So you are safe to pH a little bit higher, and then you start to get into the fat parts, the highest and most optimum absorption range, which is 6.5. At 6.3, you can see how the iron, the micronutrients are starting to fatten up as well. All right. If your pot dries out super quickly, which is always a good thing in a wet dry cycle, especially if your media is new and it's chunky bark, that is where you want to start to do your pH swing. All right, so you see how important pH is starting to come when it comes to maximum absorption of nutrients, because we're spending a lot of money for these orchid products. And the orchid fertilizers are more pricey than your conventional fertilizer. Why waste it if you're not going to pH it so that the orchid can absorb it to the best of its ability at the right potential, and not just, say, yeah, I've fertilized my orchid and, happy days. And then actually nothing really is happening. Nothing's really working. So let's just say you've got yourself that nice, spanking, shiny new media. Now, because it is not acidic, but it is staying wet longer, you might also get down to the micronutrients. However, when it comes to organic media that is brand spanking new, and there is a quick wet dry cycle, the pH swing starts to take effect. And this is where you need to determine how quickly does your pot dry out based on how you want to pH. All right. If you have a very quick wet dry cycle because it is hot, you don't have much humidity to speak of, you want to pH around 6, 5.8, and yes, that is highlighted for a reason, because here come the 3-point pH factor again, 0.3, 5.5, and look how fat the micronutrients are at this pH range. And they're going to get all of it straight away, because even if you've got a quick wet dry cycle, the moment that nutrient solution hits the roots, it's just going to go sponge and up into the orchid it goes at the perfect rate, if you see what I mean. And your orchid will still be getting all the other nutrients that are up there, just in a lower dosage. But that is why people talk about pH swing. It's not like, one day this because, no, I just feel like it, or I can't be bothered to pH down, or whatever the reason. The pH swing is to cover the macronutrients and make sure that the micronutrients are also absorbed more often than not. We cannot forget them, and that's why I went through this whole long spiel at the beginning that the micronutrients do serve a purpose. Not so much copper, sorry, my nemesis, but boron and manganese, the assistant managers to nitrogen and magnesium, for lack of a better term. So that is why the pH is important. Now, if you were to say, yeah, whatever, I have 2 drops of this and I have a 1/4 of a teaspoon of my fertilizer and I'm always coming in at 6.5, perfect. Absolutely perfect. You can see what's going on. The whole macronutrients are in their full glory. And even if the pH drops while the pot is a little bit wetter for the longer period of time, here we go. The iron, the manganese, and the boron starts to, they fatten up again a little bit. Now that is a quick wet-dry cycle, and if the orchid, for example, is in very old media, the media is going to stay wet longer, and then we're going to pH at 6.5. Well, that shift is going to go to the micronutrients and happy days, but we don't know that. It is not guaranteed. The moment you use fresh media, the moment you start watering, media starts to break down. It is a little bit of a guessing game, and then you need to analyze your orchid really, really well. Is it growing the way it's supposed to? Are there no nutrient deficiencies starting at the end, etc., etc.? So that's why I always encourage people to be on the safe side. 7.5 is not a problem. If you're scared to do that because you've never heard of it, at least it keeps you safe. While the orchid is wet, the barrier, the margins, the boundaries will shift down below. Now, that was all in the discussion from the point of view of organic media. And that includes sphagnum moss. So we won't go into that, but organic media. Let me just make sure. Let me just see. I've been watching the comments move, but I think you've got a nice little conversation going in there and in the chat on its own, which is awesome. pH is exponential, so the difference between 6, 7, and 8 is not. No, absolutely not. It's not even. It's also very dependent on the age of the media and what you use. And Roby Robin says, I've been doing that the other way, Nina, dropping the pH to 5.8 and that is where we're coming to when it comes to organic media. Absolutely, Roby. Exactly. There are some differences there. So Roby says, I'm not understanding what you mean, exponentially more homework. Okay. Chris San says, you use the Jack's 2-part system. I just noticed there's no potassium in the ingredients. Is this a concern? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Some people say that you need the potassium for, if it stores in the flower spikes, etc. If your orchids are blooming okay, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you have the option to change, at least, to get it in there during the active growing phase, then please, yes, please try and get some potassium. But for the time being, I wouldn't say it's not a concern. No. The pH stays logarithmic, meaning that an increase or decrease of integral value changes the concentration by a 10-fold. Example, 10 times more acidic than a pH of 4. That is correct. Yes. So when I said 0.3, right, I was talking from what I see on my display as opposed to what the ratio is as per what Sharon just said. That is correct. Let me just go back and check here with Chris Sun. I don't want to brush over that comment because, it is important. That's why we are here. Potassium is crucial for your orchid's overall health, and it helps the plant deal with stresses associated with temperature, disease, and insect. It controls the stomata, the absorption of nitrogen. It's a transport vehicle. Oh, it's the city bus, which moves the nutrients to where the orchid needs it. Okay, so the concentration of potassium should be similar to the concentration of nitrogen. So, Jack's 2-part system, and there is no potassium. I'm going to look into that for you, Chris. That's odd. Jack is normally super balanced and has everything put together. Okay, right. So let me just make sure that I timestamp this right now so I can get back to it and make sure I don't forget. Where are we? 1 hour 35. Just make sure that I do this. I don't want to lose you there, Chris. But I would like to look into that and confirm or ever and elaborate further. I'll send you an email, okay? Because that is strange. At first, when I read that, I thought, yeah, Jax knows what they're doing, no problem, not to worry. But then, not at all, not in either one of them. You're welcome. You're welcome. All right, so what I wanted to address is where Roby already addressed the subject when we're talking about inorganic media, in case any of you are growing in inorganic media. pH plays a huge role before you even think of fertilizing. All right, pH starts with the media you are putting in the pot. Whereas when we use organic media, we've got our bark, we've got our orchid, and boom, 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 we've got our sphagnum moss, choop, 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 and then we pot up, and then yay, off we go, and we know what we're doing. And organic media is, in that sense, that's when the pH starts, because normally, well, at least I didn't soak my bark, measure the pH, let it dry out, and know where I was at. I didn't do that with every single batch of organic media that I was going to pot my orchids in. With inorganic media, however, yes, it is important, because inorganic media is completely void of nutrients. So whenever we do, our orchids will 100% depend on what we are putting in the pot, but 100%. And of course, it will also 100% expose us to the mistakes we are making when it comes to what we're putting in the pot and at what pH, because deficiencies will show up within 7 to 8 months. All right. Now, when it comes to inorganic media, whatever it is, my recommendation is please wash that media out of any kind of dust, even if it's just preliminary. I am not even going to talk about it. Is at this point not even necessary to go into the sterilization, the boiling, whatever. I'm not even going to talk about that. We're not talking parts per million. We're talking pH. But please, to get a good reading of what the pH is of your media, please clean it of any dust and debris, and then measure the pH, nothing else, just the pH of the water you're going to be soaking it in. Write that down and put your nicely rinsed inorganic media into the container and soak overnight. It won't take that long, but to be safe, let it steady out, let it soak overnight. And if your inorganic media changes the pH of the water that you had initially measured, you need to write that down. And then the whole process begins with regards to cleaning and boiling, etc., and then measuring the pH to see if it's going to steady out. You can also rinse that bucket out again, put the media back in, add fresh water, measure the pH, and then wait another 24 hours and see what happens. Now, they say, every brand that has inorganic media on it says that it is inert. Okay, it is inert, but it has its own pH. It won't change the pH in the pot or whatever, but it has its own pH. It doesn't mean, because they say that it's pH stable, but it's pH stable based on what you do with it, if you see what I mean. So in my example, my water is an 8 pH. All right? I put, forgive me, scratch that, rewind, forgive me. My water is a 7 pH when it comes out of my RO system. Okay? I put my clean leca in there, just freshly rinsed out of the bag, none of the cleaning hoopla that I would normally do. I put that into my 7 pH RO water, and the next day I measure it and it's shot up to 8. And I can do that again and again. Woohoo! Happy days! That's great. Phew. Thank you for letting me know, Chris Sun, because I would have been like typing away. What are they doing? That's awesome. Thanks for letting me know. So anyway, in 24 hours, my pH has risen and I've got inorganic media and my water is at 8. And I can do that over and over and over again. My water will go to 8, meaning, yes, my leca or my inorganic media is not affecting, let's say, the pH of its pH, it's affecting the pH of the water. And it'll do that for, as far as I'm concerned, ad infinitum. Now, the best measure then is to understand the pH of your media when dealing with inorganic media, and then you have to pH accordingly so that whatever happens in your pot is the pH swing for all the nutrients to be absorbed. Okay, and that is why I have down here pH 5.8 marked high, because I'm a scaredy cat. I don't want to go to 5.5. We can hear the bracket of pH for orchids being safe from 5.5 to 6.5 or 7. We hear that a lot. I don't want to go that low. So I like to be a little bit cautious. I'm conservative that way. My lowest pH ever is going to be 5.8. And maybe that's why my Phragmipedium Weaver hates me so much, because he's not getting acidic water. I got to think about that one. So at 5.8 pH, I'm still getting a really, really chubby fraction of all the micronutrients. You can see that's really fat still there at 5.8. So plenty of ideal absorption ratio. But over the course of the wicking process, do you mind? Over the course of the wicking process, and that is why inorganic media, for example, like a self-watering, pumice, you name it, even if we talk about lava rock, though it doesn't have wicking, it absorbs water in its own way and then climbs up, the structures of the lava rock, whatever it is. Whatever happens in the reservoir starts to move through the roots, up through the media that has a pH of, in my case, 8, and it needs to balance itself out. And the pH swing happens within the pot as the water and the root system absorbs the water and the nutrients, and eventually at the top of the pot, around about there, we're at 6.5. It works. I've tested it. I don't know how to film it, but I've tested it. I promise I wouldn't tell you. I wouldn't tell you anything that if I wasn't sure, I'd promise. Just like with this, slow release fertilizer, I'm telling you, not sure, not going to go there. Can't give you ABC 1, 2, 3. But in this case, it works. If your media, whatever you put in your pot, has a pH that is way too high for any fertilizer solution to absorb naturally the nutrients, by the fertilizer dropping the pH to a margin that is acceptable over, let's say, 3 days, because, sometimes pots take time for the reservoirs to absorb. Please make sure you use a pH down and get it down to wherever you think that within 3 days that pH swing will be sufficient to get it to 6.5, maybe a little higher, whatever, but you want this. Nice chubby little places of the macronutrients while you start with the nice chubby micronutrients. So your pH swing, your pHing of nutrients or supplements is, let's say, 2 in 1 step. You don't have to do it alternatively. With organic media, one time you'll be pHing down so that you get your micronutrients, and one time you'll be pHing a little bit higher to get your macronutrients. When it comes to certain setups, medias, etc., you will be pHing at one level, and then the pot and the media, whatever it may be, may do the rest. You may be fortunate enough to get whatever media you have, and it does not hold on. It does not change the pH of the water you soak it in. 7. My lava rock does that, for example. Lava rock, love that stuff. I wish I could, eventually carry the bigger pots with lava rock filled in it, but one is getting old, so it can't happen. It's unrealistic. I don't want to be repotting that much. Lava rock is a detriment to orchid roots, but it's fabulous, and I have a lot of orchids in lava rock. But my lava rock, if I soak it for 24, 48 hours, my water stays at 7. So all the orchids that have lava rock in them, and Ceramis, for example, they get pH'd at 7, or they get pH'd at 6, whatever comes out. Usually, when I put my fertilizer solution in at the 7 pH, I get my 6.7. That's perfect for me. I'll take it. Now, sometimes I have to go down because it'll always be 6.7 all the time. So sometimes I have to pH down in order to target my micronutrients. And that is why, in my opinion, no matter what the media is, you have to use a pH. I know that I'm probably saying something that is not really popular, especially when people say I've never pH'd, and I've been there myself. Yes, I lost Cattleya. I lost Cattleya new growths back in the day when I was in bark and clay pots, but I thought it was because of the rain. Honestly, I thought maybe rain got over the balcony, hit that, not enough airflow, whatever. I never ever considered it could be a calcium issue. And then one day, boing, light bulb moment, I thought, hey, I still can't prove that it was a calcium issue, but it could have been. I just won't know because I never did it back then. Certainly a very, very interesting topic. Now, there was one thing else I wanted to mention before I went off on the tangent about my organic media days. I probably won't get that back until we finish the live, but there was something else I mentioned. I completely forgot about it. But I was talking about micronutrients. Oh yes, alfresco. Let's talk about the alfresco setup. That wonderful climate. It's just perfect. You've got yourself all these goodies and they're just out there living their best life in the trees, and you walk out and you just enjoy, right? So we've got Mother Nature doing the perfect balance, but we can do better because we have them in our garden. Now, you can, in that case, you can get, these hoses, etc., whatever it is that you're going to use to water your orchids, because it doesn't rain all day, every day, continuously, and they will need water because usually in places like that, there's a lot of airflow as well. So make sure, the only thing in that case, I say, make sure that whatever your water source is, that it is not above 8. Okay, that is all. I don't know if it comes from a deposit, a reservoir, if you store the rain, I do not know. Highest recommendation I can tell you, do not put any water on the roots above 8. There is not enough time alfresco growing for any media to do the switch to correct the pH that they're safe for your roots. There's not enough time. It hits the roots absorb it, and it just pours across, and that's it. You don't have a buffer in those circumstances, all right? Same with fertilizing. If you're going to be such a good orchid mama, papa, and you want to fertilize, make sure that you go conservatively based on how much humidity you have and how much airflow you have if you're going to fertilize. Whether you put little bags of slow release fertilizer that you hit with your water, make sure that you avoid any kind of root burn by whatever kind of fertilizer you use. But the most important thing is that you do not put water on your roots, on your orchids that are above 8. That is all I can say for alfresco. Honestly, that to me is the biggest recommendation I can give you at this point in time. Let me just check here. Okay, good morning again, but okay. Is it due to the exponential thing? That's Roby talking to Sharon. Jules. Oh, Jules is Julie's son. Okay. All right. What you're doing with the pump? Yeah, Okay, if you're thinking on replay, what is she doing? Is I am just skimming through the comments, and there's a conversation going in the comments section, which is awesome. I love it. Okay, so when it comes to pH, this is what I've got. This is why I keep banging on about pH, because of the nutrients and because of the deficiencies that can happen. And yes, we can correct them, but not if we don't know what's going on. And one of the quickest way to diagnose an issue is to know the pH of what we're dealing with. And the rest then is environmental, and can you or can you not fertilize, and what to do the moment that you can come out of the gates and start fertilizing. Again, pH, because if I in April start pH fertilizing or giving my orchids calcium nitrate to give them a great head start, but I just hypothetically, let's just say I'm not bothered with how much pH or whatever is going on, and I pH, let's say, at 7.5. I'm not really doing much for my orchids, as you can see where the nitrogen and the calcium and everything is. They'll get some. They'll be happy maybe because it'll be more than they've had in 3 months. But what's the point? That stuff is expensive. Calcium nitrate is expensive, so I want to make sure. And I'm not kidding. I bought a little tub and it cost me like 57 euros. That was three or 4 years ago. And I have used one. I bought two. I bought two in its day. And yeah, I spent a fortune on that. So I'm not going to, I'm glad I know that I need to get at least to here, and that would be a soak, because I am hitting them hard straight away with calcium nitrate at 6.5. I'm not messing around with a lower pH in the hopes that in a couple of days it's going to be absorbed. Oh no, we're putting those things, I'm telling you, calcium nitrate is going into buckets, and I know how many pinches I need, how many parts per million I will get. And then I'm pHing at 6.5 because we don't have time to waste. That has to get into their system immediately. All right? So when you soak something, target the right pH and you will know that the components are going to hit. If you're just watering for the sake of fertilizing over an extended period of time, pH accordingly based on how wet your pot is going to be. And what your baseline is if you're growing in inorganic media. What is the baseline of your media as it goes into the pot with the orchid? And then you've got your pH swing. And if you have any questions after this, I fully understand. I'm so glad I had my script in the beginning. I'm so glad for the long and lengthy sciencey kind of terminology. I had them written down. Sorry. The neighbor seems to think I need to listen to his music too. Isn't that awesome? Oh dear. Anyway, so there's that. If you have any questions, if you want to hop up, I can do that for about 10 minutes. And if not, we can always pick up on this on another live. We can also do a live where we address questions from previous lives, or just let me know in the chat. Again, there would be possibly some hot air. Dogs have something to say, yes. They don't appreciate me having to listen to the music from the neighbor either. Oh, yesterday was nice. He was playing Verdi. That was nice. I was like, oh, I've never heard him play Verdi before. Maybe it was a Christmas present. Who knows? It's good stuff. I got myself a vape. I'm vaping pink lemonade. Can you believe it? It's good stuff. Tastes like pink lemonade. Yay, Roby! Roby, do you want to tell everybody what's happening tomorrow, or do you want to leave that as a surprise? No, thank you, Roby. Thank you to everybody that's been here. All of you, even those that haven't typed. I see you. I don't see you specifically, but I see that you're here, and I'm ever so grateful. Thank you. If Roby wants to give it away, he can. Otherwise, I will stay stum about it. And then we'll just, surprise! There you go. Be there or be square. Roby Robinson is going to be our guest for tomorrow's live stream. You are welcome, Chris Sun. Thank you for being here on your Friday afternoon. Yes, we are. We're going to discuss semi-hydro and self-watering. And Roby has emailed me several questions. That'll be the skeleton of, hey, Andy Land. It's good to see you. Yay. So Roby asked me, live stream, is anybody interested? And I said, well, you are, and that makes it interested. Yes, that makes it interested, It just takes one. It just takes one. So yes, that's what we will be doing tomorrow night. I've already set the event. Hopefully you got your notifications. And if not, now you know. I'm going to do it at the usual time. Nothing good happens after midnight. I know, Fernanda, and I'm so sorry. So sorry. I so appreciate that you're always here. So sweet. I can just, I hope that Olivia is purring away somewhere on your lap. And boy, does he have some beauties to show. Oh, and if your camera doesn't cooperate, I have the pictures. Yeah, I didn't put them on the community post because if you can make it, then you'll see them on the live. And then on Monday, we're going to fire the community post up with some beautiful, beautiful colors. Oh, I'm happy to hear that, Fernanda. That's great. Sort of have this picture in my head with Olivia there. So sweet. Anyway, everybody, so that's on the schedule tomorrow. Roby, I will be sending you a link. We can, pardon the terminology, but we can hook up in the studio before we go live. I'll send you a link with an email half an hour before the scheduled event. Check out your notifications and switch them on, and then hopefully we'll see you domani. Well, for me, it'll be on Sunday, but for the rest of you, domani. And once again, hand hearts to everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And if you think of any questions afterwards, once the stream has processed, pop them in the comments, and it could be the topic of another Q&A or extended video, okay? You don't need to come with white makeup. You're gorgeous. I'll take you as you are. No makeup, no stress. Alrighty. Thank you, everybody. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of whatever it is that you're doing. Make sure, though, that it is a rest and that you stay safe. Hand hearts and much love to all of you. Bye.